Hello and welcome to Mr. Manley History Teacher's latest video on how to answer the main factor style question, which is a 16-mark question with 4 additional marks for spelling and grammar, which is part of the Health and the People GCSE paper. Let's have a look at some of my top tips for how to best answer this type of question. So first of all, as this is the highest mark question in the Health and the People GCSE paper, it's the question you need to give yourself plenty of time to answer. Now, before you go into your mock assessment or your GCSE assessment itself, you really need to think about whether or not you want to answer this question last, because it is question 4 in the paper, or actually whether you want to answer this question first. I would recommend trialing this in a mock assessment, or if you do any practice assessments in lessons, trying it there. But seriously consider having a go at answering this question first, because it's really important you give yourself 20 minutes to answer this question. Even if you give yourself 15 or so minutes to answer this question, you may run out of time, you might not be able to write the conclusion, and it's really important you answer this question fully in order to achieve the maximum mark possible. Make sure as well that you write a paragraph on the factor given to you in the question. Now, you'll see in a moment when we talk through the model answer that I address the factor in the question first. That's the first paragraph I actually write about. And I would recommend as well that you address the factor in the question in your first paragraph in your answer, because then straight away the marker sees that you have addressed the factor in the question. If you don't address the factor or write about the factor in the question, it will cap the maximum mark that you can achieve. So I would strongly recommend, as I say, writing about the factor in the question first of all for your first paragraph. Finally, try to cover a broad range of time in your answer. So if you only cover the factors within one specific time period, so it might be that you're given the factor of government or government intervention, or maybe religion, and if you only write about religion or government intervention within one particular time period, so it could be just write about your factors within the medieval time period, or maybe the Renaissance time period, or the modern time period, that will also cap the maximum mark that you can achieve. So try and write about a broad range of time periods in your answer for this type of question. Let's have a look now at the model answer, and I've broken it down this time because it's quite a lengthy answer into 2 slides. So as I mentioned in my top tips, in the first paragraph I've addressed the factor in the question. The question is, has war been the main factor leading to improvements in surgery? And as I mentioned previously, you want to address that factor you're given in the question in the first paragraph. And secondly, it's important to try and cover a broad period of time, if not within the first paragraph, but at least across your whole answer if you can. So I'll start off by saying, to a large extent, war has been the most significant factor throughout history that has led to improvements in surgery. So already there's a judgment in the first sentence. In fact, in the first few words of our answer, we're giving a judgment as to how important, how significant surgery has been. And in the second sentence, we're writing about war in the Renaissance period and how that has affected or improved surgery. So during the Renaissance period, surgery was developed by André Paré, who was a battlefield surgeon. By being exposed to conflict, so again, we're linking back to the factor in the question, Paré ran out of boiling oil, which was used for treating gunshot wounds. Paré made an old Roman ointment of roses, turpentine and egg yolk, and he found that wounds treated with this mixture healed better than those treated with boiling oil. So I guess you could say there's an element of luck here with Paré's discovery, but had conflict not been taking place, then it's unlikely he would have discovered this. So that's why Paré's discovery of using that concoction, that solution to improve treating wounds during battles, is linked to war during the Renaissance period. And then I've also spoken about conflict but in the more modern and recent time period as well. So surgery also improved to a significant extent. Again, we've got a line of argument here. We can see, the marker can see. So we've linked this judgment here to the judgment in the first sentence. So surgery also improved to a significant extent during the First and Second World Wars. We've given some specific dates there as well. I'll put that in a different colour to show the marker we're using specific evidence and own knowledge. And infections were prevalent during the First World War, and surgeons were encouraged to experiment on how to prevent these from spreading to other parts of the body. Through a mixture of trial and error, surgeons worked out the best way to prevent infections from spreading was to cut away the infected flesh and to soak the wound in salty saline solution. This ended up saving many lives during the war. So again, this paragraph here, this section of the first paragraph regarding the First and Second World Wars and how conflict improved surgery or led to the improvement of surgery, we sort of round it off by saying that it's ended up saving many lives during the war, and we've used more specific evidence and own knowledge there. Then we need to bring in another factor. So for this type of question, as well as writing about the factor you're given, I would recommend writing about two other factors that also led to improvements in surgery. Now, for my second paragraph, I thought about this actually before writing my answer, and I do recommend just very briefly writing out a quick plan before you answer this question on the two other factors you also want to write about for this type of question. So you might highlight or circle or underline war, and then above the question or next to the question or below the question, write down two other factors you want to write about in your answer as well. And in this paragraph, I'm going to be writing about the work and skill of individuals. So alternatively, another factor that led to improvements in surgery was the skill of individual surgeons and doctors. So that's the factor that we're writing about and addressing here. Individual skill. Whilst this was not as significant in the development of surgery as war, so again here we're giving a judgment that, it was significant but not to the same extent as war was in the development of surgery. The work of Andreas Vesalius in the 16th century helped give doctors more accurate knowledge on human anatomy, and this would help surgeons undertake surgery in the future. So with regards to significance is all about why events or people are important at the time, but also the impact they had going forward as well. And I've said that Vesalius's work actually had an impact on the future work of surgeons and doctors. Vesalius also proved that some of Galen's ideas on anatomy were wrong. He encouraged others to investigate for themselves and not just accept traditional teaching. So again, we're using specific own knowledge about Vesalius in this sentence. And then we've rounded off this paragraph with a judgment, hence why individuals were relatively significant in leading to improvements in surgery. So we said that individuals, they've got some degree of significance, but we're sticking to our line of argument that war was the most significant factor leading to improvements in surgery. Let's now have a look at the final factor and final paragraph before the conclusion to this model answer. So the final factor that led to improvements in surgery was due to chance or good fortune. So again, we're telling the marker that we are going to be writing about the factor of luck or good fortune in our final paragraph. For example, had Paré not run out of boiling oils in the 16th century, then he may not have had to use a mixture including eggs, rose oil and turpentine, which proved more effective than boiling oil. Now, what I would say is if you can think of examples that you haven't used in previous paragraphs, try and do that. Now, I know I mentioned Paré when it came to the factor of war and how war led to improvements in surgery. Sometimes if you're running out of evidence or ideas that you can use within your factor or your paragraph, you might have to repeat a significant individual, but try to avoid doing this if you can. I know in this answer I've repeated using Paré again, but if you can think of other examples that you haven't used previously in your answer, I would recommend doing that instead. In 1853, when giving birth to her 8th child, Queen Victoria used chloroform. So here we're jumping up to sort of more modern medicine. We're looking at the sort of revolution in medicine in the 19th century. So we're using an example here from a different period of time, which is going to gain us more marks. Her doctor was John Snow. So again, we're giving a name here of an individual using some more good specific own knowledge and evidence. And Queen Victoria later spoke of that blessed chloroform in easing the pain of childbirth. This gave the public reassurance chloroform was safe and effective. But I've put a bit of a twist on this information because I've said, however, had Queen Victoria been given an overdose of chloroform, which actually was happening in the mid-19th century, she may well have died. And this was the case with Hannah Greener, who was a 15-year-old girl who died from a procedure to remove an ingrown toenail because she was given too much chloroform. So in some respects, Queen Victoria was quite lucky that she was given a safe and appropriate amount of chloroform for her pregnancy. And so had Queen Victoria become ill or even died from being given an overdose of chloroform, then potentially chloroform may not have become as widespread as it did throughout the latter part of the 19th century up until the modern day. So in some respects, there was an element of good fortune and luck in terms of Queen Victoria's dosage of chloroform during her pregnancy. So we've written now about 3 different factors in 3 separate paragraphs, and now it's really important that we sum up our answer by giving a judgment in our conclusion on which factor we have decided was the most important. However, the best answers, before we even get to the conclusion, should be clear because of a line of argument as to which factor was the most important anyway. So let's have a look at this conclusion now. Overall, I believe that war was the most significant factor that led to improvements in surgery throughout history. So again, nice clear judgment on which factor we think was the most important. Whilst the discovery by Paré that wounds treated with his turpentine and yolk solution had an element of luck to it, so we are addressing another one of the factors that we've mentioned, the conflicts of the early 20th century were vital for the reduction in infections to soldiers and eventually general populations during the remainder of the 20th century and beyond. So we've said, well, yes, luck was quite significant with one of the examples that we've looked at in the main body of our essay. However, war was the most significant factor leading to improvements in surgery. So this is a good way, an effective way to round off your answer. Let's have a look at those top tips once again before we finish. So make sure you give yourself plenty of time to answer this question. You may want to answer this question first, like I said in your paper. The best time to experiment with this is during a mock paper or a practice paper in lesson, rather than actually doing it in your GCSE assessment itself. Make sure you write a paragraph on the factor given to you in the question, and like I showed in the model answer, and as I mentioned previously, the best way to do this is just to write your first paragraph on the factor you're given in the question. If you think you'll leave it till the end and you're running out of time, you might not end up writing about the factor you're given in the question. So I strongly recommend writing about the factor you're given in the question in the first paragraph of your answer. And finally, try to cover a relatively broad range of time in your answer. And you don't have to cover every time period: medieval, Renaissance, industrial change to medicine, and modern medicine. You don't have to cover all of those different periods. Try to cover at least 2, if not 3 of those time periods in your answer to this 16-mark question. And finally, one other tip I'll mention as well is, if you can, give yourself a minute or 2 just to double check your spelling and grammar. This question does potentially give you 4 marks for spelling and grammar, and just 30 seconds to a minute even just to read back through your answer, double check to make sure all your spelling and grammar is correct. Could be the difference even between one grade or another at the end of your GCSE assessment. So make sure you do go back and check your spelling and grammar. I hope you enjoyed the video. Click on the like button and subscribe to my page, Mr. Manley History Teacher.